live on Twitch. And if you're not watching live on Twitch, you're listening by way of Fill in the Void Podcast Network, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you can download and listen to your favorite podcast. On the line with me right now, I am joined by Critical Mayhem of Mayhem Merlin and Critical Carlos Gabriel. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time out.
Hey, thanks for having us. We appreciate it. Yeah, of course. Thank you, my man.
Of course. Before I get into my stuff, actually somebody through Instagram sent me a question for you guys, and I kind of wanted to get along with that one really quick out of the way first. This is coming from, let's see, I want to get his name right. Nelson Green asks, when you guys first debuted as a tag team at Team Vision Dojo, did Carlos have any problems with Mayhem in the tag team symmetry, basically? Because he says, quote, I think Carlos has more time in the ring than Andrew, which is true because you're the more experienced one, right?
That is correct.
And then Mayhem is a high flyer, uses kicks, and Carlos is also a kicker. So how would you like to tackle that question? Let me go with Mayhem first.
Yeah, so the first time that Carlos and I teamed up at specifically the Team Vision Dojo was not very long ago. It was probably, I want to say, back in July. But we had actually been teaming together for almost a year at that point in various other promotions throughout the state. So the dojo wasn't exactly our first time together, but our first time teaming together was about a year and a half ago, and we had our hiccups like every team does the first time they get together. But I think we kind of had a natural symmetry, and because we both wanted the same thing. We both had very similar styles. Like I said, Carlos is very well versed in his kicks, and I'm getting there. I'm not as good as he is, but yeah, we both tend to high fly a little bit. We both kind of have a similar vision, so I think we had a really good chemistry right out of the gate. It wasn't to say that there wasn't a little bit of struggle. Like I said, it's going to happen every time people start to get together.
Carlos?
Yeah, I can agree with that. I basically wrestled Andrew for like 100 times before we even started teaming together. And once that chemistry kind of grew in the ring, we just kind of decided to like tackle everything together. As a tag team, even when we first started, we didn't really have a problem. We're both very hardworking people, both very focused on what we want to do in wrestling. So having that natural chemistry just kind of came together. So I think even when we tagged for the first time with Team Vision Dojo, we worked really well together.
So just to put a little bit of things into perspective here for all those who are listening and watching, Mayhem Merlin debuted in May of 2017, and Carlos debuted in 2014. So there's a little bit of an experience edge here for Carlos. Just to kind of hop onto that, to add on to that. Obviously, it's a difference. It's the same story being told, but a different way of working it. Obviously, singles and tag wrestling. What's the difference for you guys, if any, working as a tag team versus as a individual?
So since I started first, I've been a wrestling fan my whole life. So when I started wrestling, I actually got into it right off of high school.
Mm-hmm.
Turned 17, found a small school in Massachusetts, and just started wrestling. From there, I never really did any tag team. Having to wrestle as a singles competitor, it's very different. When you're in tag team, you have to be on point. When you're singles, you have to trust yourself foremost in everything. I think the difference is that you just have more fun. Once you're with somebody that you're comfortable with, you know what you're doing in the ring, and you're just having fun out there. Once you know you're having fun, that's the big difference between the singles and the tag team right there.
Mm-hmm.
For me, joining a tag team, it wasn't my goal. I always thought of myself as a singles competitor. But as soon as I met this guy and after I kicked him in the face about 100 times, I guess I didn't really mind tagging with him.
Yeah. When I got started pretty late to the game. I didn't start watching wrestling until I was almost 15, and I didn't even start training until I think it was right before I turned 25. So I definitely got started later, but I grew up watching an era where tag team wrestling was predominant. I got started right out of the gate with the Hardy Boys, which I think is something that influenced my style a bit, and going back and watching Dudley's and Edge and Christian and stuff like that really just inspired me to have that drive towards a tag team. My big thing with tag team wrestling is not only do you have to hold yourself accountable, but you've also got somebody else to help take care of when you're in the ring. You've got somebody who you've got to have their back the whole time, and at the same time, you know that somebody else is going to be there to help you. If you get wrecked in the ring or something, you know that you've got a friend, that somebody you can trust is going to come in and help you out if they can and save the day. And I think it gives a lot more opportunity to add so much more dynamic to a match. I love singles wrestling as well, but tag team wrestling, those tag team spots where two guys get to work at the same time, and Carlos and I have figured out a couple good moves that we like to do, some good spots, and I think once you find that chemistry and again with people that are chasing the same goal, I think that's what really makes tag team wrestling as fun as it is.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. Definitely a different dynamic in the ring. Absolutely. We're talking to Mayhem Merlin and Critical Carlos Gabriel. For those who are watching live on Twitch, if you want to ask a question, feel free to send it into the Twitch chat. And for anybody who's not watching live, you can check them out on their socials. Twitter, @MayhemMerlin for Merlin. Instagram, @ArtRask31. And then for Carlos, you got on Twitter, @CriticalCarlosG. And then on Instagram, @Critical_Carlos Gabriel. That's one word. Yeah, there you go. I'm not thinking right today. Anyway, so with you guys as a tag team, okay, the two things I've always advocated for, always doing the show and working and everything, is women's wrestling, which is, obviously seen its boom right now, and tag team wrestling, which has kind of gone in flux. I love watching tag teams on the independents because it's just guys like yourself and girls like yourself, girls, they're all hungry. They want to do something different. They want to get noticed. They want to, there's just something about it. And I think with something like the Crockett Cup coming up for the NWA in April, I think that's going to help make a resurgence of the tag team division, like put tag teams more in the forefront with that kind of showcase. Obviously, we could go with NXT and what they were been able to do with their tag team division, but what do you guys feel? I'll start with Carlos first. What do you think? If you feel that, like, what would set the tag team wrestling scene over the top and make it must-watch wrestling again?
I mean, you have your fair points right there. Tag team wrestling has always been kind of, I don't want to say subpar, but kind of on the backstone of any kind of singles wrestling. When you have you have so much talent out nowadays, doing all these things all over the world, you're not gonna focus a lot on tag team wrestling. Now, there's also things like, with the Crockett Cup coming up, you mentioned, that's gonna put a little bit more spotlight on things like that, are definitely gonna be a big factor of tag team wrestling. But in all honesty, when you look at you look at companies like Ring of Honor, they're main eventing tag teams.
Yes.
You have the Young Bucks, you have the Briscoes, even just the Bullet Club itself would just come in as a whole 6-man tag team and main event a whole show, with such talent that they can do singles wrestling as well as they can do tag team wrestling. And I think that's pretty much going to be like what defines wrestling. Once they have those tag teams that are established, and then you have tag teams that they can be singles wrestlers, they can go on tag teams as well. That's pretty much what's going to make it pop again. Honestly, I would want to see more tournaments where they do have these tag team wrestling. I feel like they don't spotlight them as much, especially with that. You mentioned it yourself with the Women's Revolution. You have all these women doing different things. You have these women doing great, great things in the ring. There's wrestling for everybody now, which is great. But if this first tag team tournament they're gonna have is gonna be great. I don't see why they wouldn't have more. Once they have that spotlight on tag team wrestling, it's just gonna shine itself because they're already doing it. It's not being portrayed as much like Ring of Honor is definitely doing a good job about it. But when it comes to independent wrestling, you'll see 1 or 2 tag team matches, and that's about it. You can have a whole show with a tag team tournament, and it'll probably be as hot fire as everything else.
Agreed. Merlin?
I think
kind of what Carlos was saying is it's definitely going to bring to light the tag team, division. And I think that one thing that could definitely help is finding more kind of teams that have established themselves as a team, rather than a lot of times you'll find shows where they'll just put people together to make a tag team match. Not necessarily if like, hey, we got a bunch of guys we're trying to get work for and put them together, but having people who have been working together for an extended period of time and really have that tag team chemistry. I think that's something that's really going to, help bring tag teams to a rise. People, well, like I said, who have been working together and know what they want, know how to, structure themselves when it comes to, trying to put a match. And
you know what? I completely agree because that consistency is key. Once you have that consistency in professional wrestling, that's what really sells. You said it yourself, women's wrestling, you're going to see the same women working their ass off every single time. You got Tessa on Impact doing a great job. You got Taya on Impact doing a great job. And you got all these women in WWE wrestling trying to get over. Becky Lynch is the most over you're going to see in women wrestling right now. She's doing it.
In wrestling, period.
Yeah. Like, consistency is definitely going to be key, like you said. When you're just putting people together in a random show, they're not going to be as well versed as to people that have been doing it night in and night out. So I completely agree.
Yeah, because I think, like you kind of said, that the important key with tag team wrestling is the partners having that kind of chemistry, and it all helps. I mean, like you were saying before, you were wrestling each other 100 times before you tagged together. I mean, once you're on the road with certain people for a long time, you kind of get that feel for each other anyway, competing against each other. Now you're tagging with each other. It just makes things that much better because, oh, well, I've already wrestled this guy 100 times or whatever it is. I mean, I know what he can do. I know what I can do to make him better and vice versa, right? So I think that'll be – I think with the Crockett Cup, and, tell me if I'm wrong, other talents will be out there and be like, oh, well, I mean, obviously if you're a worker, obviously tag team wrestling, whatever. But, okay, well, maybe I can do this. Maybe somebody will want to try and tag with somebody else. Again, we're going to go back and reference the Women's Revolution. A lot of young girls, like fans, are like, oh, well, maybe I can do this. It's not just a guy thing, It won't have that much of an impactful effect, I guess, but for people to try something different is kind of the point in which I'm trying to come across. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, you said it yourself. When you have these people growing up watching wrestling, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? I'm gonna be on TV with the World Heavyweight Champion on my waist. That's like the first thing. I know I did it when I was a kid. I was holding my little paper made championship, on top of my brother, beating him up. So, like when you have these people now, you have these girls growing up thinking I can do this. You have, they're not just growing up and doing they're growing up thinking they can do it. They're doing it. That's amazing. When you were a kid and you're watching people win a championship, you want to win a championship. But now that you want to focus more on tag team wrestling, you can grab your best friend and be like, hey, we can do this. And now you're thinking differently. Now you're thinking, okay, this is not. It doesn't have to be a solo sport anymore. Because that's
That's one of the bad things about wrestling. A lot of people grow up thinking this is a solo sport. And